Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I am found, was blind, but now I see. Lyrics to the first verse of the popular hymn, Amazing Grace, which was born from the contrite hearts of one among many who took part in the brutal, horrific, cruel and dehumanizing practice of the slave trade, a man by the name John Newton. It should arouse a lot of curiosity how a man involved in such inhumanity could be inspired to create a song so popular that has affected a great number of people over the centuries on a deep and spiritual level. So deep that people, when asked about the song, make comments such as, "It's more than a song. It's a song of reconciliation and hope. It helps you to see a better day." If there was a chance to ask John Newton's victims for a description of his personality, they would likely describe a man who could not be reconciled with one who could create works that would inspire such commentaries in people. So how then did this song come about from the once disreputable John Newton? A wretch, as John Newton describes himself in the song, was what he was during the first 30 years of his life. Mean and miserable. His mother, a godly woman, died when he was about 7 years old. After several brief years of formal education away from home, after his father remarried, Newton left school and joined his father's ship to begin life as a seaman at the age of 11. He grew up without any particular religious conviction, but his life path was formed by a variety of twists and coincidences that were often put into motion by his recalcitrant insubordination. A vulgar young man with periods of violent, angry behavior. Newton got involved in the slave trade in his early 20s, hunting down slaves while working for a period of time on the islands and mainland off the coast of West Africa, collecting slaves for sale to visiting traders. Eventually, he became a captain of his own slave ship, Duke of Argyll, which made voyages from Great Britain to Africa, where he loaded it with slaves, and then to America, where he sold them. On March 10, 1748, before he became a captain, while he was still serving, Newton acknowledged God for the first time. Traversing the Atlantic Ocean to England, the ship on which he was serving was battered by a violent storm off the coast of County Donegal, Ireland. As they struggled through the storm, Newton did what he had not done since childhood. He asked God for help. The storm ended miraculously, and the ship managed to reach Ireland safely. "I began to know that there is a God who hears every prayer," Newton later wrote. Newton began to read The Imitation of Christ, a book by Thomas à Kempis, as the frightening experience at sea marked the moment of his spiritual conversion. But despite this, Newton continued to buy and sell slaves up until 1754, not because he knew it was wrong, but because of an illness, and because he didn't like to be separated from his wife of 4 years at the time, Mary Catlett, and their daughter in England. He eventually felt convicted of the inhuman aspects of this work and became a strong and effective crusader against slavery. He became a clerk at the port of Liverpool for the next 9 years. When he ended his seafaring, he began studying theology, and he was greatly aided by the evangelist George Whitefield and the Wesleys. But he decided to stay within the established Anglican Church. In the year 1764, John Newton was ordained by the Church of England and began his first pastorate at the little village of Olney, near Cambridge, England, where he began to write hymns with the poet William Cowper to express their love of God and the joy at having received His favor. Hundreds of these Olney hymns were eventually produced. One of them was Amazing Grace. Later in life, Newton became ashamed of his activities during the slave trade. He believed that the death of his wife and his daughter's illness were part of a punishment. Convinced of how unlawful and morally wrong slavery is, Newton spent a lot of time arguing for its abolition, putting an end to it in England, convincing a lot of important people in London that he was right. After concluding his ministry at Olney, Newton spent the remaining 28 years of his life as pastor of the influential St. Mary Woolnoth Church in London. Among his converts, there was Claudius Buchanan, who became a missionary to the East Indies, and Thomas Scott, the Bible commentator. By this time, Newton had also established a strong relationship with William Cowper and other political leaders engaged in the crusade for the abolition of the slave trade. In February 1807, when the act to abolish the slave trade finally became law, John Newton, nearly blind and near death, rejoiced to hear the wonderful news. It is interesting to note that the year of Newton's death, 1807, was the same year that the British Parliament finally abolished slavery throughout all its domain. Amazing Grace was written to illustrate a sermon on New Year's Day of 1773, based on the reading of 1 Chronicles 17 and 16. It is unknown if there was any music accompanying the verses. It may have simply been chanted by the congregation. It debuted in print in 1779 in Newton and Cowper's Olney Hymns, but settled into relative obscurity in England. In the United States, however, Amazing Grace was used extensively during the Second Great Awakening in the early 17th century. It has been associated with more than 20 melodies, but in 1835, it was joined to a tune named New Britain, to which it is most frequently sung today. The core message of this song states that forgiveness and redemption are possible regardless of sins committed, and that souls can be delivered from despair through the mercy of God. Amazing Grace is one of the most recognizable songs in the English-speaking world.